In this video, we're going to be building this double-seater Adirondack chair. The thing I like about this particular project, it is a low-cost but high-profit. And the way you put it together is really straightforward. It may look a little complicated, but surprisingly, it's pretty easy to put together. Not a lot of pieces and parts to this one. Pretty straightforward. So first thing that we want to do is talk about the materials required. We are going to need 5 2x4 8-foot long pieces, and then we're going to need 3 2x6s. And what I've done here on all these parts here, the tabletop, the seat, the arms, that is all 2x6 material that we're going to rip on our table saw, rip it in half. So we're going to be left with approximately 3/4 inch thick material. Now, if you didn't want to use 2x6s, we could go ahead and use fence pickets. In fact, at my local Home Depot, they have 3/4 inch thick cedar fence pickets that are about $6 a piece. And those would be a good choice for the material for this as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and do it all in treated, but that would certainly be another option. But if you're going to use fence pickets, I would make sure it's 3/4 thick and not the 5/8. To me, 5/8 is just a little chintzy. You can use 5/8, but I think the 3/4 inch thick material is just better material. Okay, so with that all said, we'll go ahead and cut up our parts real quick, and that part is really simple. And then we'll look at how to go about putting it all together. We do have the plans available for this project that include your cut list and all the necessary dimensions and things of that nature. They're $5, and the information on how to get the plans for this project is in the listing description below. All right, let's talk some bench parts here. So out of our 2x4 8, this piece here is 64 inches, and I've put on a 20-degree bevel. I did that on my table saw over there. Okay. And then this next piece is 59.5. Now let me show you where that's going to go in the drawing. That's this piece right here. So that 64-inch piece is what's going to hold our arms and our table and our backs. That's that first piece we talked about. This piece here is 3 inches smaller. So this piece is 56.5. And it doesn't show it very well in the drawing, but it's this back support piece. Let me see. It's this piece right there. So that's the 64-inch piece. You can see the 20-degree bevel. This one does not get a bevel. Okay. 56.5, 59.5, 3 inches difference. Okay. And then we have 4 pieces that are 23.5, and that makes up our front legs. 23.5 inches. And then these from tip to tip, we don't see the tip because we chopped it off, but from tip to tip, 35 inches. So what I do when I'm making these is I cut them square at 35 and then change my miter saw to 20, and then from the point down here and from the point up here, cut it at that 20-degree angle. Okay. Now there is a drawing in the plans, but this dimension, so we come down 2.5 inches, then we use our carpenter square and square that off. Okay. So this is a 90-degree angle. So we cut our 20, measure down 2.5, use our carpenter square to get this angle. And we do that obviously on all 4 legs. Okay. And you can see that here better in the drawing over here. You can see what we're talking about here. So you can see how that is going to sit on the ground that way, okay? So, and then our last piece is this 16.5-inch piece, which is this support right underneath our cup holders here. It's going to hold those 2 legs together, okay? So that takes care of the bulk of our frame. Now, what we also know, in order to make the frame of our chair, we need these armrests. Now these are cut out of 2x6s, so we're going to come over here to our 2x6s. We've got one piece that is 33 inches. Now again, all these 2x6s get sliced in half. So we have one piece that's 33, two 31s, okay? And then this piece is 28. This is gonna make up our arms. And then these, I believe we actually need 5 of these. The plans call for 4, but it seems like the first time I made this, we needed an extra one. So you may need 5 of these, but these are 20. I cut 4, okay? And so that's gonna give us 8 boards. So we're gonna split everything in half on this table, okay? So 33, 31, two 31s, 133, two 31s, 128, and for now, 4 20s, but we may need a 5th 20, okay? And that is gonna take care of all of our parts. So now we're gonna go ahead and begin our assembly process, which is shockingly simple. Now, I've built a bunch of these, and I forgot to talk about this, but I built a bunch of these, and the dimensions and everything is in the plans if we want to. But see, I built a bunch of these, so I have, and even if you're only building one, I recommend you build these little leg pieces. Surely you got some scrap laying about, but this is a 20-degree angle here, okay? That's a 20-degree angle. Let me get you a dimension. I believe 20, let's call it 20 3/8. I believe that's what the dimension was anyhow. But one end has a 20-degree miter, okay? And you see what it says on the side? It says Adirondack helper, okay? And you will need these. These will come in handy when we put the frame together. All right, so that, like I said, that takes care of that. And let me show you how really easy it is to put these together. So for the first part of the assembly process, because we're gonna need them for our frame, I went ahead and milled out my armrest here. So I split it down the center, and now what I'm gonna do is round off these edges. So I just took my miter saw and nipped it at a 45-degree angle up top here. I measured down 10 inches and then measured over 2.5. Drew a line and cut it. And I did this after I sliced it in half. Okay, I would not recommend cutting this off before you slice these in half. All right, so with that done, now I'm just going to round this over a little bit and go ahead and just round over the arms completely, get those all ready to go, because right now this kind of has a little bit of a sharp edge there. Okay, so I'll get that done. All right, so we've got our 4 pieces that are 23.5. We've measured up 14 inches, and this is where our horizontal board is going to go, and all these are going to be put together. So I'll go ahead and get that laid out and show you what that looks like. Let me show you this configuration real quick. This is a 16.5 inch 2x4, 16.5 inch 2x6, which we did not talk about earlier. Again, I split it in half, which gives us basically a piece of 3/4. But what I did is I just attached it, and this is going to become our cup holder. So I believe it goes actually up here. And it's just easier to attach this now before we attach this to our main frame. So I'm going to go ahead and attach this now, and then we'll talk about dimensions and everything, how we go about setting all this up. All right, so let's talk about our first subframe assembly here. This piece here is your 59.5 inch piece, okay? So obviously it goes flush here. Now earlier we talked about measuring up 14 inches, right? And that's what that line is all the way down. Now I'm using 2.5 inch screws in this particular application. Normally I would use 3.5 inch screws. Always use 3.5 inch screws if you have them. If you don't, 2.5 is okay. I'm running low on 3.5 inch screws, so opting for 2.5. But normally I would use 3.5 at this application. This is 16.5. It goes flush here, flush, flush. And again, we've already assembled that cup holder part to the bottom of this. Okay. So the key dimension here is from outside to where this 2x4 is, which is 21.5. So if we come over 21.5, and then we do the same thing from the other end, come over 21.5, that'll leave us from outside edge to outside edge 16.5. Okay, so just double check all those dimensions that you have that same setup. 59.5, come over from the outside edge 21.5 on both ends. That'll leave us 16.5 in the center. Okay, so now that we've got all that done, now what we're going to do is stand this on end and put on all of our legs. Now for our legs, I actually don't have any 3.5-inch screws, but I do have some 4-inch screws. So I'm going to be using 4-inch screws to attach our legs to this. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that done, and we'll show you what that looks like. I'll show you what I'm doing real quick here. So I've taken some 2.5-inch screws and put them in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our leg and line it up there and put those screws into our vertical leg. Okay, and the tip of this right here should be flush with the bottom of this. So it takes both of my hands to do this. It is a little bit cumbersome, but you could definitely do it. And go ahead and put all the legs on that way. So I've just stood our frame upright, and you can see I've got one leg on already, and it may decide to tilt. So what I may do is go down and do that far one, and then lay it down on these legs and put these other ones in. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that done. We'll show you what that looks like. All right, so now we have all of our legs in place. And just to double check the dimension is right, if you measure from here to here, that should be 20 inches. Okay, so we just have those 2 screws in right now, and now we're going to come in the front with our 4-inch screws. In this case, normally it would be 3.5, just to double up on those screws through each one. All right, so now we have those 2 4-inch screws in all of our legs through the front. So now the next step is to put this board on the back that's going to kind of staple all of our legs together, and is going to be the backboard, the back support board for our backboards. I know that probably sounds terribly confusing, but let me show you where it goes, how it goes. And to do that, first of all, is I'm going to flip this over right side up. All right, so we've got it kind of sitting right side up now. I mean, you could see how all those cut lines we did all sit nice and flat like it's supposed to. But there is one issue I want to point out, is you see how this is proud of our front 2x4, where here it's flush, we're flush, we're flush. Again, we're proud over here. So we cannot be proud. So if you're proud, now I'm proud a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these screws out and reposition this. This has to be flush, okay, because of the next piece that goes on. If we were off just by a little bit, you could probably just take a sander and sand it down, no big deal. But because we're off that much, I'll go ahead and pull these screws and reposition them. But I just want to kind of point that out, that's why I say it's got to be flush, because when we put these top boards on, there's a reason for that, okay? So let me get this repositioned, and then we'll put on our back piece there. All right, so let's talk some dimensions here. The main dimension here is where to place this board. So from the tip of our leg board here, right at the tip, you want to measure down 17. Okay, and I went ahead and just did that on all 4 boards. The main 2 that you want to concentrate on are the 2 outside boards. If this had a sag in it, we would be able to see it with our marks there at 17. And you can see here, I fixed our problem here. That's now flush. So we got that taken care of. And again, this is your 56.5. We're flush on the outside edge here on both sides. Again, we should be using 3.5. I'm short, so we're using 2.5 in this application. But now that will make that frame quite rigid. All right. So now the next thing to do is to install our support boards. Remember those support boards I showed you at the very beginning? They're 20 3/8 with a 20-degree miter on the one end. Let me show you how those go on and where those go on. All right, so let me show you where they go on. We have just one screw, so this can pivot if need be. But the face of this goes right in line right there at that 17-inch mark. Okay, and that 20-degree miter should go even with our leg here, which it does. And its sole purpose, you'll see here in a moment, is to give our back arm just a little bit support for our back piece. That's going to go on. Now the front overhang is 1.5 inch overhang. Okay, and what we're wanting to do, of course, is we want to make sure that this arm is square, just like that. And that's the purpose of this. Again, we're going to be putting in another board across the back here that's going to pull some weight down. So that's why we have those supports. Okay. Same thing, obviously, on this side. You can see here, the front of this board is right in line with our 17, in line with our 20-degree. This is just one single screw, so it has a little bit of a pivot, because we want to make sure that that arm is dead level, okay? And that's what that's going to give us. So as long as we match up all of our points, that 20 3/8 with a 20-degree miter is exactly what we need. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and position our arm. It's going to be flush. Let me just kind of show you generically how this will go. It's going to be flush here, okay? But it's going to come back almost to where we rounded it off. We're going to have 1.5 inch overhang. If you want a 2-inch overhang, that's fine too. But that's basically what we're going to do, okay? So we'll go ahead and get that into position. And then we can go ahead and position our piece our support piece that goes along the back. That's going to support those two arms. Okay, so let me get it done and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so now let me show you what I've done here. I've got 1.5 inch overhang. I've got one 2.5 inch screw that is holding our armrest, and I've done that on both sides. Okay, and we're flush here, 1.5 inch out here, one 2.5 inch screw. Now I've taken my 64-inch piece, and all I've done is I've kind of lined this up. It's sitting on top. I've come in 1 inch from the back edge. There's my little tick mark right there. So we come in 1 inch, and then I've centered it on my arms. So you see now the back arm is on our little helper piece. It's flush, so we know that's square, right? And then we can verify that too by just coming in with our square and making sure that this piece is in fact square to our arm, okay? So we can do that on both sides, make sure that that is square, but that should be pretty accurate. Now, I've got it showing sitting on top of the arm, but we actually need it on the bottom of the arm. And so because I don't have a helper or what have you, I just set it on the top, and then I'm just gonna come in and do this. So I'm just gonna come in, boom, just like that, line it up to my 1 inch mark, and put the screws through the top. And of course, once I have this edge, then I can just go around and do the same thing to the other side. So pretty simple stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, but I'm gonna be using 1 5/8 screws through the arm into this 2x4. And of course, I've got that bevel 20 degrees there, okay? So let me go ahead and do that quick and position that. All right. So we have our 2 5/8 screws there. I went ahead and put in another 2.5 inch screw here for the front arm. Now we are going to build a little bracket right here. We could possibly use even like a little shelf bracket, a little ornamental something or other, if we wanted to be a little bit fancy with it. I'm just going to probably use if I do happen to go by Hobby Lobby today, I might see if they have a cute little bracket there. Otherwise, I'll probably just use wood. But again, 2.5 inch screws there. This is totally flat now. for our tabletop. So we're going to put that in place. And we can go ahead and look at cutting all of our 2x6 boards over there. Cut those in half for our seat boards and for our backboard. So that's what I'm going to do next. So now we're going to work on our backboards. That's kind of our next step before we do our seat. But to do our backboards, we've got to make some marks. So we have some dimensions that we've got to come. So what I did here is I came off, let's start at the bottom. Okay, so in between, this is 20 inches from outside to outside. So in between, we're going to be left with 17. Half of 17 is 8.5. So I went ahead and made me a mark at 8.5, but then I deducted 2 3/4, which is the width of our panel, our middle panel here. And so from this side of the 2x4 over, we came to 5 3/4, and then I measured from there over to 5.5. Okay, I know that may sound confusing, but if you just measure over 5 3/4, and then from that mark to 5.5, you'll be fine. Now up top here, we have to add. So we came over, what I did was I came over from the side of my arm to 10, came back 2 3/4, and then from that mark to this mark is 5.5. Okay, and that will get us close. And for this purpose, we don't have to be exact. And so we did the same dimensions on both sides. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my 33-inch board. I'm going to rip it in half. That'll give me 2 of those. One for the center here, one for the center there. And then we have to round over the top. So let me get that cut first, and then we can move on. Nothing too terribly special here. We've got 2 templates which we provide in the plans. This is simply a half of a 5.5-inch circle, and this template here is for the 31-inch pieces, and it is 5.5, but this is a 5.5-inch circle that way. It's like almost like a semicircle. Okay. So again, those templates are provided to you in the plans. You just cut them out on a piece of paper, and you can see here, I've just transferred it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my jigsaw, cut one, get it shaped the way I want it, and then we'll use that as the template for the other one. And then we'll do the exact same thing for our 31-inch pieces. But obviously when we use that template, you can see we're just going to line it up here. Trace that, and then do that for your 31-inch pieces. So I'll go ahead and get that done. Okay, so we have our first piece in place, and what I did down here, again, when we made the mark, I put it right, you can see right on those marks that we figured out earlier, and that gives us center. And then of course, if you want to, you can also check square to make sure that this is straight up and down, just as kind of a double check type situation. And it's flush across the bottom there. And what I did is I used my Ryobi narrow crown stapler with 1 1/4 staples, popped in a couple of staples just to hold it temporarily. The other thing, when you're attaching, especially when you're attaching it up here, is to make sure that this is all the way down on this support. Make sure it's not sprung on you. Make sure it's all the way down before attaching it. Now we're going to come back in with 1 5/8 screws, top and bottom, to secure all this, but we're just going to get this in place first. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and then we'll cut our 31s in half and do the little round over on that as well, and we'll talk about that more when we get there. This is the part where the bench really comes together very, very quickly. I think you'll be a little bit surprised at just how quickly it really does come together. So I've gone ahead and done the same thing. You can see I'm right there on my marks that we figured out earlier. You can see that pencil mark right there. And again, just double check that we are square. You can see we're perfectly square. So we know that first one it's straight up and down like it should be. Okay, so I'll go ahead and cut my 231s. That will give us 4 pieces, and then we'll talk about adding the template to it when we get those cut. Now it's entirely up to you how you do this, but when I split my 2x6s in half, I like to put them on our bench with the freshly cut side facing forward. So on this template, these are 31 inches, we have to have our shape opposite. So there is a left and a right. So these are the freshly cut faces. So when we're cutting the template, just make sure if you want both faces facing the same direction that you do so accordingly. Okay, so again, I cut one, shape it, and then I'll use it as a pattern for the other 3. All right, so now we can go ahead and put them on our bench. So now we have all of our panels in place, and all I have right now is just using staples. And so at the bottom you can see they touch, and at the top there's just, I just eyeballed this spacing. You could actually use a little piece of scrap and have that be a fixed spacing, but you can see it just splays out a little bit left and right, and they're both done the same way. All right, so next we can split our 20-inch pieces for our seat board, but I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and talk about our table a little bit. So what I do is just measure from the back side to this front edge is 27.5 inches. Yours should be the same. And so I just add 5 to that. And because I want an inch overhang off the back, and I want a 4-inch overhang off the front for my cup holders. Okay, so that's why I add. So it's 32.5 inches. We're going to need 3 pieces 5.5 inches wide, and so we're going to go ahead and cut 2 pieces 32.5 off a 4th 2x6. Now at the beginning of the video I said this takes 3. No, you definitely need 4. I forgot, I don't know how, but I forgot about the table boards. So I didn't have those factored into the original materials list. 32.5 inches, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead, split all my 20-inch wide boards here for my seat. Go ahead and split my 2 32.5s, because I need 3 pieces for my tabletop. And we still have our arm supports to make. And this one will almost be done. But now we can take off our support blocks. We don't need those on there anymore because now everything's nice and solid. Technically, you should not take those off until you have your 1 5/8 screws here and your 1 5/8 screws along the bottom, okay? Then you can take those off. Now everything's nice and secure. So let me get up to that point and I'll come back and we'll talk about the rest of it. Now we have our table complete, and you can see here with 32.5 inches, we needed 3 boards. Now I did find the center of this board and came off, left me an inch out front here. So we have a 4.5 inch overhang, and I put in a 3-inch hole with my hole saw. And I'm using this new hole saw. It's called the Bulldozer. Got it at Home Depot, and it does a really good job. You can see the holes are nice and clean, and it cuts through pretty quickly. And then I did take my palm router with a 3/8 round over and gave the holes a little bit of a round over there. So now what we have to do is we have to do our seats. So the first thing I want to do is I want to dry fit my seat board. So let me do that. And you're going to want to do this too. So we're going to dry fit our seat board, and you can see that even though I did probably cut this at 20, it doesn't quite fit. So we want to make sure that that lead board does fit in there properly. So it doesn't quite fit there. We'll trim a little bit off. What about this side? Same kind of situation. So I might have cut that seat board just a skosh long. So let me cut that to length, and then we'll talk about what we need to do to that lead seat board there. Okay, so I took about 1/8 of an inch off is what I did. So now they fit in there just fine. So what we need to do is this seat board needs to overhang this front edge here 1/2 inch, okay? So I'm gonna take this to the saw and cut a 2-inch strip, but I wanna have my table saw blade set to 10 degrees. So we're gonna come over here to my table saw and we're gonna set it to 10 degrees, okay? And then we're gonna go ahead and rip that seat board, and then 10 and 10 will actually give us 20. Now, I know that doesn't make any sense right now, but I'll show you what I'm talking about, 10 and 10. So we're gonna have a 10 degree, make sure it's set at 2 inches, and then we'll go ahead and cut it. So there we are. You can see we're set maybe just a little bit strong of 2 inches. But no, it probably is a bit of an optical illusion with the camera. So we're right at 2 inches. That's where we want to be to rip this, and you'll see why here momentarily. Now let me show you this. So we have this bevel. There's a bevel here. It's a little bit tough to tell on the camera, but there's a 10 degree bevel, and we have it set right at the point of these legs. Now we're going to flip this board over and get us the other 10 degrees. And now you can see we have a nice joint there. So to make that nice and smooth, we will take a sander to it. But you can see that's how we're going to do it. And then we add the rest of our boards in place. So we get our lead board in first, and then we can do the rest of it. So I've gone ahead and put these in place temporarily with a few staples. We were going to come back and screw everything down. And then right here at this crease is really nice and smooth. I spent a little bit of time giving this a nice little round over. Same thing over on this side. Gave it a nice round over because your legs are going to be right there. So you want it to be nice, smooth round over. Okay. So now what I did is I measured the distance from here to the front edge. It's about 12 3/4. It matches on both sides, believe it or not. So what we're going to do is we're going to rip our boards, our remaining boards down to 4 1/8. That'll give us a tiny little gap between them, not very much. So we're going to do that and go ahead and get them mounted. So now we have all of our seat boards in place. The last thing to do, we've got to make a piece that connects those 3 across the back. We come down 5 inches and connect that piece across the back. That back piece, I believe, is about 15 inches. And then there is a piece that connects these 3 boards together right here in the center. We just use a 2x4 scrap for that, or a piece of our material that we split in half. We can use that. And then we have our arm supports that we have to put in. So let's go ahead and get that done. So let me show you what I was talking about. So we came down 5 inches, right? Marked it. You can see over here, so we came down 5 inches, and then we just take our carpenter square, put it in there, and that's how we got that straight line. And then our board is 14 inches, right along that straight line. Right now I just have a couple of staples holding it in place. We'll come back in with 1 1/4 screws and screw that down. So our back supports are in place. Again, these are 14 inches, 1 1/4 screws. These are the screws that we're using. Got these at Lowe's. I could not find these at Home Depot. And so this piece here, this is 16.5 inches wide. So this support piece is going to be cut at 15 inches. But I'm going to turn the bench over and attach it from the bottom. There is that support board underneath the tabletop. Now, because it's not seen, its exact placement is not that critical, left to right, top to bottom, etc. So we just put it in there, put in a few screws to hold those 3 boards together. So now we'll set it back upright and take care of our arm supports. Pretty simple stuff. There's what the arm support looks like. And what I did is I just put in a couple staples there, one staple down here to hold that temporarily, and then I'll screw it in place. So this is your armrest. 10 inches, 3 inches, connect the dots, that's your angle. Simple. Now, as I said previously, I thought about stopping at Hobby Lobby and get me something fancy there. That would have looked nice, but that looks good. You could add a little design to it. You could do whatever you want to it. I just want to keep it kind of simple. So I'll go ahead and put in my other one and get these screwed into place. All right, well, that is the final look. We did go ahead and put in 1¼ inch screws in our seat boards. Normally I'd use 1 5/8, but I ran out. And so that is the final product.